Okay. Okay. Greetings from the south of Israel. Today we're on the 20th of the month of Kislev, 5 days away from the holy holiday of Hanukkah. And even though we haven't had a home game for a month now, what more apropos place to have a class than right outside a prison, the Beersheba prison here, where there are eight Jewish political prisoners that are being held. So when we're talking about the times of Hanukkah, we're dealing with the holy Maccabees, I couldn't think of another better place than to come out here and to speak about the subject of Jewish Maccabim. So first of all, what they say, so close but so far. We're outside here in the parking lot because we're not even allowed to go into the parking lot to film over here. So this Shiur, of course, is for the tremendous Jews that are here, and we'll give their names. We have Yehuda Savir, Nachman and Shlomo Twito brothers, Moshe Orbach, Yinon Ruveni, Meir David Chai Ettinger, happens to be Rabbi Kahana's grandson, Eviatar Slonim, and Mordechai Meir. So there are 8 tremendous Jews that are here, and as we will see during this class, their tremendous merit that the Jewish people are benefiting from the fact that unfortunately they are suffering for us, for the Jewish people. Okay, so number one, it says in the tractate Bava Metzia on the 85th page. It's a very interesting story. A great Jew himself named Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Prince of Israel. He was once near a factory, a slaughterhouse, and he saw an animal that ran towards him. He ran away from the slaughter team. He ran away, and then he kind of put his head in the coat of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi looks at this unusual sight, and you have probably guys running around with knives, chasing this animal, and all of a sudden this animal is hiding. This animal is hiding in the coat of Rebbe. Rebbe looks at the animal and he says, what's the deal here? This is your tikkun. You've come to the world. He's talking to this animal, and your purpose in life is that you be slaughtered, and then you're turned into meat, and then people will say a blessing over you, and you've been elevated tremendously in tremendous amounts. An animal, you're from the animal kingdom, but if you're eaten by a person and they say a blessing and it helps them do good deeds, it helps them learn Torah, etc., then they've been uplifted to a higher world. So, that's what Rebbe told this animal, and of course they eventually catch up with this animal. They eventually catch up with the animal, and of course he's slaughtered. But that's not the end of the story. It's kind of like the beginning of the story. The Talmud says right there that for the next 13 years, Rebbe suffered a tremendous toothaches. Anybody that's had for a day or two, you know that's bad enough, as they say. But imagine 13 years he suffered. The Talmud goes on. First of all, the number 13 should ring a bell, like ding, ding, ding. Should ring a bell because the number 13 is the numerical value of the word ahava, which means love. Which means that Rebbe received this, received his punishment, we could say. He received his yisurin, his suffering. He received it lovingly. He wasn't cursing out God, and he wasn't complaining and kvetching. He accepted with tremendous love, not for a day, 13 years. 13 equals the numerical value of ahava. And therefore the Talmud finishes the story by saying that during those 13 years, no women amongst the Jewish people anywhere, not just in Rebbe's neighborhood, but no women in the Jewish people suffered at the time of birth. We know that during the time of birth, this is a very, very touchy time. It's a dangerous time. That's why women say they say a special blessing after they've made it through the birth process. Sometimes husbands think that they might have the need to say one themselves, you know, because they're like freaking out. Maybe sometimes more than their wives are. So maybe they need the bracha. I don't know. But anyways, for those 13 years, there were no women that died or suffered during birth. Not only that, there were no babies that died during birth for 13 years. Not one. So the Talmud is teaching us here, and we could find hundreds of these lessons. The lesson is very clear that through the suffering of the righteous people as Rebbe, their suffering is an atonement for the Jewish people. So instead of Hashem blowing away the Jewish people, the righteous who accept their lot, they accept their suffering through love. They are an atonement for the Jewish people. So if we turn on our news and we hear that there was an attempt to run over a group of Jews, and the guy, had a flat tire as he was coming closer. We hear a lot of these stories, and we think, oh, what luck. Yeah, that was really luck. We know that everything is ordained. There's no luck. Everything is from God. So what we will find out after 120 years, we will see how these righteous people, like these boys and men sitting here in Beersheba prison and other prisons, they saved us. They saved the Jewish people from numerous, uncountable tragedies. Okay. The question, the obvious question that we must ask after this interesting story of Rebbe and this animal running, hiding in Rebbe's coat, we should ask ourselves a question. Now we know, according to the Torah, that animals were brought into this world in order that people should be able to become nourished and should live in order to eat them. So this is kind of their job in the world. So Rebbe just said, I don't know what you want from me. He's talking to the animal, and what do you want exactly from me? Because this is exactly what Hashem ordained your life to be. This is the top for you. As we explained in the beginning, what happens when a person eats and says a blessing and he receives nourishment and strength and he's able to go on and fulfill his commandments as a Jew. This is a tremendous, tremendous tikkun for the animal. Okay, you're doing an animal favor. It's not the opposite. You're doing the animal the favor here. So why was Rebbe punished? Not only was punished for 13 years. Rav Dessler, in his legendary work, Michtav Eliyahu, the third book, page 103. Listen to what he has to say. He says something very interesting here. He says that a person's characteristic traits, kindness, person not getting angry, all our characteristic traits that we have, happiness, anger, all of them are extremely sensitive. Extremely sensitive. And you have to make sure that you always keep them safe and sound. And we do not destroy our good characteristic traits. In fact, as we know, if we have to summarize the Torah on one leg, the Gra tells us very simply that we all came to this world in order to fix, so to speak, our characteristic traits, because we all have all kinds of midot, traits that we have to either change or we have to fine-tune them. So we're all here for a reason, and that is really, on one leg, all of the Torah is for us to perfect our characteristic traits. So, with that said, Rebbe was a tremendous person who did tremendous kindness to all of the Jewish people. Listen to this. Rebbe sat down for years and years and years, and he compiled, to make it easier for us, thousands of years later, we're sitting and we're learning the Mishnayot in the Talmud. He compiled that, put them all together, did the work for us. Imagine someone, you come to dinner, and instead of you having to cook and set the table, put the tablecloth on, put the chairs around, it's all set up for you. That's just a table. That's just the dinner. But think about the Mishnayot, okay? So that was a tremendous kindness. Not only that, Rebbe was a tremendously wealthy person, but he did not enjoy, personally, he did not use any of his wealth for personal enjoyment. How many people can say that? What did he do with the money? The money was used for poor people. The money was used for guests. He had a tremendous, this prison complex that we're at. It's called Eshel, which is, of course, we're in Beersheba, and that is where Abraham and Sarah, that's where they set up their Eshel. Eshel stands for Achilashti Avelina, which means eating, drinking, and sleeping, lodging. So it's a tremendous thing, It's It's a tremendous thing that he did. He opened up this tremendous kind of hotel. It was free of charge. There was food, there was drink, and there was lodging, of course. He himself did not indulge. He himself did not enjoy not one penny from all of his wealth. So he was a big gun when it came to doing kindness. So listen to what Rav Dessler writes. Rav Dessler writes the following: that is not a simple task for a person to sacrifice himself for God's holy name. It is not a simple task for a person to train himself, how much more so to fulfill Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name. It's an extremely, extremely difficult task. Now, with that said and done, he brings in a proof. And I never, until I saw this past week, it never dawned on me. We have a famous case of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was tortured in the end of his days. He was tortured by the Romans for teaching Torah and learning Torah in public. He could have done it in his house, but he went out in the public and he taught Torah. So, as he's being tortured by the Romans, the students come and say, Rabbi Akiva, what? This is the end? Like, this is how it's going to end? That's all, folks? So, Rabbi Akiva answers, all my life, I indulged, I suffered to reach this day. All my life, I was preparing myself for this day to sanctify, give my life for God. But he uses the word mitzta'er, which means a person is suffering. So Rav Dessler writes an unbelievable Torah. He says, we see here how difficult, even like a giant like Rabbi Akiva, when he prepared himself, when he did all kinds of exercises to prepare himself for the day where he might be called to give his life for Torah, for mitzvot, for commandments, he uses the word, I suffered. It didn't come to him naturally. That's Rav Dessler's point here. It's something that is extremely, extremely difficult. Think about it. There's 8 boys here. In other prisons, maybe there's another 15. So altogether, let's call it 30 people. Okay? Let's call it 30 people. There's close to over 6 million Jews in the land of Israel. 6 million Jews. And we have, scattered amongst the prisons in Israel, we have 30 out of over 6 million Jews. Think about that. Think about what kind of percentage here we're dealing with. It's not an easy thing. So we have these tremendous people, these courageous Jews here who gave their lives, their time, their families. They gave up their families, their wives, some of them, kids, in order to sanctify God's name. I mean, we have to humble ourselves before these types of people. That's why it says, Baruch Hashem, thank God they're alive. But if we get the tone, the Talmud tells us that people that gave their lives, on a literal sense, no one could stand anywhere near them. So these people, thank God they're living, but we can understand they're in that direction where we should be afraid to stand in their, in their midst, because these are 1 in a million, almost 1 in a million. These boys here, these men here, that could not take the desecration of God's name, seeing Jews murdered, seeing Jews injured, rock attacks, knife attacks, Molotov attacks, shooting attacks, bombings, etc. Could not take it, and went out to sanctify God's name. So Rav Dessler ends, and he says what Rebbe said was the truth, that the tikkun, the final destination of an animal is really to be eaten by a Jew with all the blessings, etc., and that he's tremendously elevated. But when he said it to the animal, we have to understand, Rav Dessler says, that when you're teaching somebody or you're telling somebody else to sacrifice to make a sanctification of God's name, you have to be very, very careful, because it's not easy to sacrifice one's life. And we have to be kind. We have to be people with tremendous amount of kindness. And there was a certain lack of kindness that Rebbe showed to the animal, even though what Rebbe said was true. He had to do it in a different way, in a much more tender way, and therefore he was punished severely for 13 years. So once again, first lesson we have here is how difficult it is for us to give up our families, to give up our lives, to give up our monetary situation, to give up our freedoms. And here we humble ourselves before people that gave it all away for the sake of God's name, and there's only a handful of them. Okay. When we're talking about the enemies of the Jewish people, it's very, very important to understand a few concepts. Now, it's very, very clear that not every Arab or not every Muslim is a terrorist, even though, of course, you all know that every terrorist is a Muslim. But not every Arab is a terrorist. But with that said, and not always people that are sitting here in prison, not always did they go and look at the record of the enemy that they fought. They didn't necessarily go and check them out to see what their track record is. Are they, are they in the Hamas, or are they in Hezbollah, or are they in the PLO, or which organization, or who do they cheer for? But we have to understand a few concepts before, in order to understand their actions, we have to understand a few concepts. Number one, the holy Rambam, Rav Moshe Maimonides. The Rambam, he has a famous letter that he wrote. It's called Igrot Teiman. And in my edition, there's different editions, but in my edition, we're on the page number is 160. Page number 160. Listen to the words of the Rambam. Some 800 plus years ago. Okay, now think about what he's saying. This is 800 years ago. Think about our days, not only in the Holy Land, but all over the world, in Europe and the Middle East and different places. Listen to his words over 800 years ago. When he talks about generalizing, when he talks about the Arabs, when he talks about the Muslims. Listen to his words. He says, listen, my dear brothers, my Jewish brothers. I know that God has brought us on a very, very difficult path because of our tremendous amount, because of a tremendous amount of our sins, the Jewish people's sins. Hashem, God has led us through this very, very difficult path. And just so you know what I'm talking about, the path I'm talking about is that we've been exiled amongst the Yishmaelim, amongst the Arabs, amongst the Muslims. For so long, they have caused us a tremendous amount of pain. And they read from their books of what he means is the Quran. They bring out various laws that they make up from their Quran, that they have to be nasty to us, to evil to us. They must hurt us. They must despise us. This they're taking out from their religion, from their so-called holy book, cheek and tongue. Listen again, he goes on. We have never